Great. Good to be here. I was very excited to interview you because looking at Slack at first, I remember back in the day being like, oh, this is like a little bit boring, but it isn't. It really isn't. Everyone's using it. We just started at CNN, so props. Just to kind of start out with this idea of Slack, it's kind of based on the idea that the way we communicate with email is just completely inefficient. What is so inefficient about email?
So I think the title of this was Email Killer, and we get that a lot in headlines. Email has many benefits. Among them, it's the lowest common denominator form of communication, so it crosses organizational boundaries really well. So I think it's not a great way, well, it's a terrible way to manage internal communication, and there's two reasons for that. One is, no matter who you are in the organization, you can be the CEO, you can be the most junior employee, you have a very narrow slice of all the communication that happens, and everything else is forever opaque to you. And the second thing is that it goes into your inbox and it's locked up from everyone else. So people using Slack have a lot more lateral transparency across the organization. So the marketing team can see where the sales team is having problems, or the technical operations team can see where customer support is running into issues. And when you start on your first day, rather than an empty inbox, you have the whole history of the team's communication. And that just comes from the default mode of communication inside the organization being public.
You guys have had, unprecedented growth. So obviously a lot of people kind of feel this way as well. Do you see us really getting away from email eventually? Are we in a world where email dies?
I think email will be like the cockroach of the internet. So it's got another 30 or 40 decades to go.
The cockroach of the internet.
A couple hundred years.
So this is great in theory, and you have a lot of tech folks using this, a lot of tech companies who are early adapters. So how do you go into the larger companies, even like a CNN, right, and say, the way you're communicating is inefficient, I need you to learn this new app, I need you to transform the way you communicate. How do you actually do that?
Well, that would be very scoldy of us. So it tends to happen from the bottoms up, and it can be pretty much anyone who brings it into an organization. It can be someone in customer support, or sales, or marketing, or engineering, or design, or whatever. And they'll get some small group of people. And it might be 5 people, or 8 people, or 30 people, or 50 people, and eventually it'll spread. So we don't do any outbound sales at all. We have account managers, and by the time they talk to someone, it's after they've already been successfully using Slack.
So let's look at Slack kind of down the road. Slack is in its form right now. What does it look like, say, in the next couple years?
Well, we have a whole bunch of features to add, and we added several last week. But I think the more interesting developments will be around the platform. Slack is a great way of distributing messages. We get a great deal of messages, all of us, that aren't just from other people at your company or your team or even outside of your company, but from machines. So things like, for us, it's someone tweeted at you, and we get about 20,000 tweets a month from our customers, and we get another 15,000 help tickets a month, and we file a couple dozen bugs a day, and every record of someone signing up for the service or making a sale, every time we deploy new code, every time we add a task, every time we get a mobile crash report, all that information comes into one place and is searchable. And to the extent that Slack can be a terminal or a kind of a portal to every other application you use, there's a huge amount of value.
Right now, Slack is for businesses, right? Could you ever see yourself doing this for consumers?
I'd say never say never. It's definitely not on our roadmap, just because we have a pretty long list of things to do, and staying focused is really important.
So that's a never. That's a maybe.
That's a not promising to not do it. I don't know.
Okay.
Never say never, right? That makes sense.
Okay. What's one of the most innovative use cases? I know that the New York Times had used something called, they used Blossom, right? And they were able to use a Slack bot to tell them what kind of stories that'll do the best on social. What's the most innovative use case you've seen of companies using this?
Oh, if I have to choose most, then I'm going to insult everyone else.
What's one you like?
Here's a bunch of random ones. In fact, there's someone, I bet, from a French company called Birdly here today, and I like this one, which is add a bot to your Slack instance, send the bot a photo of your receipt, it asks you a few questions, and now you've filed your expense, which is a huge benefit for all the people on our team who hate to use Concur. Sorry, anyone from Concur or SAP.
one of your board members has said that if you guys play your cards right, you could be a $100 billion company. What does playing your cards right look like?
I think doing well as a platform is a really big part of it. So I mean, I mentioned we have many features. We have to make it a lot easier. We have to figure out, we're at an interesting position now where we have been trying to keep up with growth for the last year and a half, and now we've built enough operational capacity at the company. And I don't mean interesting technology things. I mean people have a laptop when they show up for work, and I have a badge key card thing that works in our San Francisco office and also in our Vancouver office and also in our office here in Dublin. And now we're ready to try to grow in a deliberate way. So being able to manage our own growth is a big part of it. But what will end up being the biggest determinant of the value is the extent to which we can improve every other tool that someone uses. I'll give you a quick example. So we use Google Docs, among other services, for document editing and collaboration. And Slack makes Google Docs a little bit better. And it does that by going to fetch the actual title of the document and the preview of it, and then indexing a copy for search. So if I had sent you by, say, Skype message a link to a Google Doc, you would just get a nonsense gobbledygook URL. If I send it in Slack, you see the actual title and you preview, and it's indexed for search so you can find it again, and that makes your use of Google Docs just a little bit better, right? Maybe 2% better, maybe 5% better. It doesn't revolutionize it, but we also do that for Box, and we also do that for Dropbox, and we'll do that for OneDrive. And so no matter what tool you use, it gets a little bit better because you use Slack.
How about security? Because I think about all these trade secrets being shared right back and forth, these very, very sensitive conversations in all these big companies that now happen not on email but on Slack. Mm-hmm. So how do you guys make sure you have the best security and you ensure that those conversations aren't targeted by hackers, aren't put out there for everyone to see?
Well, we over-invest in security. And so we have a lot of great security research as a security engineering team. We also we're now 260 people, and our 50th hire was a VP of Policy and Compliance Strategy, which is pretty unusual for a company of our size, because a lot of the means you have of protecting yourselves and your customers' data don't have to do with networks and servers and people typing in terminals and stuff like that, but with background checks and physical access controls to the buildings and a lot of internal policy and compliance issues. We do SOC 2 audits and background checks on employees and all of that kind of stuff.
When I was doing research on you, I just kind of kept coming back to this idea that you're on this ongoing quest to build a video game. If any investors in here, if Stewart ever wants to build a video game, you should just invest, because he won't build a video game. That might not be successful, but the features, you'll pivot into successful companies. Last time you pivoted a feature of a video game into Flickr, and this go around you tried to build another video game and pivoted into building Slack. How do you know? I mean, it must be so easy to look back in retrospect and say, well, I knew that we were going to pivot, and this was really working. But how, when you're a founder and you're failing, and you were failing at making video games, how do you know when it's time to pivot, or how do you know what to pick up on and what is working?
God, I don't know, intuition. And I should say that I first got online in '92, so that's 23 years ago. I'm pretty old. I got to university, I got an account on the school's Unix machine, and I got my mind just blown by the internet. And that was a little bit before the web. I mean, so the web existed, but it wasn't very popular yet. But there was Usenet, there was IRC, there was Talk, there was email. All of those are means for people to communicate with one another. And the desire to make a game called Game Never Ending, which was made by the company that ended up making Flickr, and then Glitch, which is from the company that ended up making Slack, were both attempts to try to use play as a substrate for human interaction. So kind of as an excuse to interact. So I don't play golf, but I can imagine golf is a great pretext for going for a walk for 3 hours with your friends in the woods, through the countryside. My father was a really avid bridge player, and he doesn't like to play bridge against the computer because there's kind of nothing there, but he also wouldn't invite those people over to his house to do nothing. So there's something about the context of a game that is a social lubricant that gives people they get to exercise some strategy, they get to trash talk each other. It's this nice context for interaction. But the thing that's common to my early experience of the internet and to the games and to Flickr and to Slack, which it's using computing technology as a means of facilitating human interaction, and mostly about messaging. So the context of the game is messaging, sending people photos is messaging, sending people messages in Slack is obviously messaging as well. And to answer the question, I think it's you get to recognize what interactions really work, like what is either helpful to people or makes people feel good.
Human interaction for you is very big. I remember interviewing you before, and you said that the one thing you look for in people you hire is empathy. There's a lot of human interaction on Slack. You have emojis that you can personalize. There's just this idea of putting humanity back in software. Why is that so important, and how are you doing that at Slack?
Oh, it's important because it's the only way we're going to be successful. So here's our experience of Slack. We actually started the company 6.5 years ago to build this game that didn't work. While we were building the game, it was 3.5 years. We had 45 people working on it, and we had developed a system for internal communication, which is based on a pretty ancient technology called IRC. And whenever we got to the point where we had some internal communication problem that was sufficiently irritating, we would spend the minimum number of minutes addressing it and then iterate and move on. So we shut the game down, and they just realized it was never going to be kind of business that would justify $17.5 million in venture capital investment, and we were trying to decide what to do next, and we thought this system could probably work for other people. So we started building it. A couple months later, we were able to switch to it, and we started using it ourselves. We thought, this is great, and then we went out, and this is the moment where we had this giant realization where we started asking our friends to use it. And then we started begging our friends to please try it, and then we would go to their offices repeatedly and do big demos for the whole team. And the hard part was getting a whole group of people to change their behavior all at once. A lot of software, you can just decide for yourself, this is useful, I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to use it. And that could be a tool for managing contacts. It could be something like Photoshop. It could be Dropbox. It could be whatever. But you can't unilaterally decide that you're going to use Slack to communicate with your team. You have to get a whole group of people to do it at once. And that's really challenging, because at the moment they decide to evaluate it, there's zero value. No one has sent any messages. I mean, if you're the very first person in there, you can't even send a message to anyone until you invite them. There's no history to scroll back. There's no files that you can review or anything like that. So any cranky pants person on the team has kind of a veto. If they say, I don't want to do this, or much more commonly, let's wait until we close out this quarter, or wait till this big project is done, or wait for someone to get back from vacation. And the only way to get people through that hump is to really respect their time, really respect their attention, try to make it as smooth and easy an experience as we can, and really bring the promise of what we're doing to their level, to try to express it in their terms so they can understand it.
And I want to go back to Flickr, because before there was Slack, there was Flickr, which is what you were known for. What was it like selling Flickr? I mean, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, that was 10.5 years ago. So people forget the context. I worked through the dot-com explosion and the crash. And the crash started in 2000, kind of really got deep in 2001, and then there was the Enron and WorldCom accounting scandals, and then there was 9/11. And it was a pretty dismal time in the public markets generally, but a very, very dismal time in tech, and especially in the web. So the S&P was off 65%, NASDAQ was down 80%. No one was interested in investing in consumer-facing internet technologies. And so this will sound preposterous if you think about it, but the prospect of selling a company for $25 million sounded like a lot of money. And now the thing that to me sounds preposterous is the idea that $25 million isn't an insane amount of money. Chris Sacca, a well-known tweeter and investor, was telling me the story of being at a panel at another conference and someone laughing because someone had sold their company for $10 million and what a joke that was. And the founder only made $600,000. And Chris said, my parents are wonderful people. They probably would have killed someone for $600,000. And people literally do kill people for much less money than that. So I think the technology industry has gotten so crazily out of control. So first of all, that was the context. There was nothing else happening on the internet. YouTube got started maybe a year after Flickr was acquired. MySpace was acquired by News Corp 8 months later or something like that. So it was, we were on the cover of Newsweek, and it was like this crazy, huge thing. So we felt like we had made it, like we had been successful. In retrospect, obviously, if we'd kept going, we would have made a lot more money, but it's hard to say that I regret that. It was a pretty big adventure. I learned a lot. Got to introduce to a lot of people, and had a pretty big impact on the course of technology.
So that seemed like a lot of money then. You look at how Slack is growing. Are you getting the calls to sell Slack?
Yeah, so no one ever comes and says, hey, I would like to buy your company and I'll give you this much. They say something like, if you would be interested in having a conversation about how our companies could work more closely together, I would also be interested in having that conversation, or something like that. The super circumspect invitation.
Do you have like
to
a number? If they threw out a number and you were like, okay, is there a number? One time a founder told me that everyone has a number.
I'm sure that I don't know what the threshold is. I can tell that something is orange and I can tell that something is green, and there's some point in between that's a little bit hard to tell. So if someone offered us $100 billion tomorrow, then we would probably take that. On the other hand, we're growing incredibly quickly. I love the people I work with. The company's culture is really great. Our customers are super happy. We're growing incredibly fast. So many things had to come together for this to happen. Like, we're clever and we work hard, but we also had unbelievably lucky timing. Like, we came out at just the right time. There were so many trends that we kind of caught the top of the wave, so to speak. And we'll never have a chance like this again. So if we ever want to do it for ourselves, this is the time where we should do it.
You had such an interesting upbringing. I read that your parents were kind of hippies, had a lot of independence, changed your name at the age of 12, studied philosophy, lived all around the world. I mean, you have a really interesting background. How would that background and you kind of living in this communal environment, how has that shaped who you are as an entrepreneur and how you kind of run your company?
I think that, my orientation is to try to be of service to people, and I think that's something that we've selected for in building the company. So we have a very customer-first attitude, and our business decisions are based on what is going to make our customers more successful, and that's not entirely altruistic. It's there's a benefit to that we grow on the basis of people recommending us, and we retain customers if they're happy and they elect to buy our software if they think it's good. And I think that makes a pretty big difference. It's very easy to get caught up, especially in the modern area where we've kind of scientificized the idea of growth, to choose some proxy for what would make a customer happy, like some engagement metric, and then try to juke the stats so you drive that number up, rather than really being concerned with what's going to make human beings on the other end of this transaction really happy. And if you focus on that, if you focus on the utility that people are getting and how much more pleasant you've made their day, how much simpler you've made their day, how much more productive you've made them, then it's a much greater chance of winning.
And last question, because I know we always sit here and celebrate success all the time. Even in the media, we celebrate the success of founders, but you never have success without massive amounts of really dark kind of failure. So can you tell us how you deal with some of your failures and how you were able to work through it? You've got a room full of probably really talented entrepreneurs. What do you tell these folks as they're dealing with real success and also real failure?
Oh, God. So, this is an interesting thing. When we had to shut down the game, it was horrible. It's a terrible experience. First of all, it's humiliating to fail. We took money from these investors. We screwed that up. We had all these customers who were really excited, and a community that we had to pull the plug on. And worst of all, we had employees, people who we convinced to come work here. We gave them the big pitch for how great the company was going to be and how successful this product would be, and then we have to tell them they don't have a job anymore. And that's a horrible, horrible feeling. But along the way, there's lots of self-doubt, there's lots of criticism, there's lots of second-guessing decisions. The interesting thing for me is now that we're on this crazy success trajectory, the degree of stress and the degree of self-doubt and the degree of second-guessing opinions or decisions that we make hasn't been reduced at all. It's in many respects, it's actually worse now because there's more at stake. You know, there's more attention on it, there's more kind of promise, and there's a greater potential. So people have put a lot of faith in that, and now we really have to deliver.
You still wake up and look in the mirror and say, I could totally screw this up.
Oh, I think I wake up and look in the mirror and say, we've almost certainly fucked this up completely. And it's only by about 3 in the afternoon that we get back to, okay.
Breathe. Great. Well, I guess we have to end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been great. Thanks. All right. That was great.